Welcome to the Therapy Show. I'm Lisa Mustard, your host and guide on this journey of learning and professional growth. Here, we transform the way you earn continuing education contact hours. Whether you're on a walk, on a break in between sessions, commuting, or even preparing dinner, you can engage with cutting-edge insights from leading subject matter experts. Each episode features conversations with seasoned professionals who share effective techniques and tools tailored for busy therapists like you. Our goal is to enrich your practice and fit seamlessly into your active life, ensuring you stay informed and inspired without the hassle of traditional methods. You can say goodbye to sitting in front of a computer screen watching hours and hours of recorded trainings. Instead, we make continuing education as easy and accessible as your favorite podcast. So make sure to visit the website, lisamustard.com, to sign up for our continuing education membership. It's a fantastic way to earn your credits while enjoying the podcast. Join us on the Therapy Show, where your professional development continues wherever you are. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Therapy Show. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard, and I'm so excited to welcome this week's guest, Kylee Nelson. Welcome to the show, Kylee. It's so awesome to have you.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, you're welcome. And I'm really looking forward to the material that you're going to present for our listeners on perinatal health and anxiety disorders. Something that I think, well, probably most women who've had a baby have been through some type of hormonal shift after or before, during, and after of having a baby. So I think today's conversation is going to be great. I just want to remind everybody listening that this episode does qualify for one continuing education contact hour, and Mustard Consulting is approved by NBCC to provide this training. So, Kylee, before we dive into the learning objectives, can you share with our audience a little bit about who you are and how you help and how'd you get here?
Yeah, my name is Kylee. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm licensed in Oklahoma and Colorado. And I work with women specifically during the perinatal period, and I am in private practice. So pretty much I work with moms who are pregnant or have babies or toddlers. And I got in this space after going through my own perinatal journey that was very difficult, and I struggled a lot postpartum. And at the time, I was working as a therapist in community mental health, and I still felt like I didn't know what resources to ask for. I didn't know how to find them. I didn't know if what I was struggling with was normal or if it was too much. And so it really sparked an interest for me in learning more about perinatal mental health. And then I started working with women specifically focused on perinatal in like January of 2020. So when my son was about 1.5, and it was like right before COVID. So
Wow.
a time when lots of people needed help.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can only imagine what that was like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It was like a big transition, like for
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. I just remember it like it was yesterday. I can't believe it's been like 4 years, 4.5 years. That's crazy. Crazy how time just passes by. Okay, well, I'm sure maybe you'll touch on your story a little bit as we kind of get into, the learning objectives, because I have lots of questions. Okay, so the first learning objective is identify the 6 most common perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So where would you like to start with that?
Yeah, I can just share what they are and then a little description of both. And then I'm happy to share how my own story kind
Okay,
of fits
great.
into those. But the 6 most common perinatal mood and anxiety disorders are depression, anxiety, PTSD, so trauma like earlier in life that's resurfacing, which can sometimes happen. And then we have OCD, bipolar disorder, and psychosis. So those are kind of the big ones that we look for. And then I think if we wanted to add like a 7th, not as well known, but I see pop up a lot, is neurodivergence. So ADHD and autism, specifically for women, a lot of times that can get to a space where it feels less manageable to cope, and then it can show up
Gotcha.
as well.
Okay.
Those are the 6 main ones. I think something that's important to know diagnostic wise, major depression disorder is the only one that has a perinatal modifier for it. So if you have a client who has PTSD postpartum, it's not going to be diagnosed as postpartum PTSD. It's just still PTSD or like generalized anxiety disorder or those diagnoses that we all know. But those are the big ones that we watch out for during that period of time.
Okay. Okay. This might sound really basic, as in very beginner therapist, but
For
whenever
sure.
we have a new mom come in or any, I don't know, I don't want to say new mom because it's going to be maybe even prior to becoming pregnant. When do we start assessing for if we know if a perinatal issue is going on? Like, how do we know when it's showing up, I guess?
Yeah. So whenever we think about something being like specifically perinatal, it's when the symptoms are showing up for the first time during pregnancy or postpartum, or they're like reoccurring during
Okay.
pregnancy or postpartum in the case of like trauma or something like that. But for it to be considered a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, it has to be starting during pregnancy or during that whole first year
Okay.
after having a baby. And so it doesn't have to be like the first month. It can be 6 months down the line. And now you're starting to have these anxiety symptoms that are coming up out of nowhere that feel really overwhelming.
hmm Okay. So, what would you say? And maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself here, but what percentage of women are going to show some signs of some type of mood issue? Not necessarily a disorder, but maybe a mood issue.
Yeah, so the statistics are 1 in 5
Okay.
for a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. And
Okay.
so that would qualify for a diagnosis. So
Wow.
if we think about just having trouble outside of a diagnosis, that's going to be much higher
hmm
too.
Okay. Okay.
It's
That makes
a lot
sense.
of people. And then for partners, the statistics are 1 in 10 partners struggle postpartum or during pregnancy, but typically postpartum after the change has happened and the routines are different and needs have shifted. It can be like a really big shift and a hard
Yeah.
time for people.
Yeah. What when women come to you and they're coming in for support, do you think that they are aware of what's going on or like I'm just thinking back to like and for me, after having the babies or when I really kind of hit my mood got really weird and really wonky and I was up and down and anxiety. I mean, you name it. Like I feel like I had it. Do you feel like these women coming in, like what's it like for them when they finally show up?
Yeah, usually when someone finally shows up to me, they are feeling really overwhelmed, they're feeling unsupported, they might be feeling really out of control. Their emotions are just kind of taking over and they aren't able to show up in the ways that they want, whether that's at work or with their child or with their partner or for themselves. It's just everything feels like so much
hmm
the
hmm
big theme. I know in the media, we hear a lot about postpartum depression. That's the big one that everyone talks about. But it is actually pretty rare for me to see someone who comes into my office that has depression. Usually it is more anxiety, OCD, PTSD. Those are the big ones that I tend to see more often. And I think that that can be confusing for people because that's not what's talked about the
Yeah,
most. It's
right.
like, I'm not sad. I'm not sleeping a lot. I'm not
Right.
lethargic. I'm tired, but I have this like anxious energy and I'm thinking about all these things and I have to get everything done. And so I think that can be kind of startling for people to be having a different experience.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that because I remember after having my first child, I wasn't depressed. I wasn't sleeping. I was so anxious. And when you're not sleeping, everything is exacerbated. All your symptoms get worse. So I remember thinking to myself, it's a lot worse because I'm not sleeping. If I could just get some sleep. But how am I supposed to get some sleep when I got to feed this baby every 3 hours? Constant. And you want to do it all, at least I did. I wanted to do everything. I didn't want to pump and give it to my husband. I was like, I'm the mom. I do this. This is what I do. This is my role. This is my job. And it was really hard for me to ask for help beginning.
For sure. And I think that that's a big thing that I work with a lot of clients on at the beginning is how can we find some space for you to take care of yourself and also show up as the parent that you want to be. Where is there a little bit of give there because we have to get sleep,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have to eat, we have to drink water. Those are all things that we have to do to be able to function long term. And so it's finding ways of how can we prioritize sleep when you feel like you can sleep. Like maybe you're going to go lay down at 7:30 when you put your baby down for a few hours instead of staying up.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a discussion I had a lot. Oh, I remember that so well. I remember that so well. Okay, this is really interesting that you're saying that most most of the women that show up, it's not really postpartum depression. It's the anxiety disorders or the PTSD that's really coming in, I guess, more prevalent.
Yeah, I would say those 2, and OCD has been showing up a lot
Mm,
within, like, the last 2 years of my work. I've seen that a lot more.
okay. And would you say that those women that are showing the anxiety and the OCD and the PTSD, when you start working with, do many of them say, this isn't my first rodeo with this issue, or is it coming out of nowhere?
Yeah, I would say I see a good variety of both.
Mm,
This is feeling really out of control. I don't like this,
mm,
and it's brand new.
yeah. If somebody wanted to work more with this population, what type of trainings or what would you recommend that they do to really kind of hone in on this niche?
Yeah, a really great place to start. Postpartum Support International has a 2-day introductory training that they offer. And a lot of states have like their own Postpartum Support International chapter. And sometimes they will provide like funding and scholarships for the training, which is really cool.
Mm,
But that's a great place to start. And then if that feels like a good fit, you can take the advanced training and then you can take a test to become perinatal mental health certified through Postpartum Support International.
okay.
And that can be a really good way to just get started, get some basics. Outside of trainings like that, Karen Kleiman is a therapist who has written a ton of books about perinatal mental health, working with parents during this period of time. Any of her books are fantastic to read.
That's really helpful. I know that they're part of your reference list, so they'll be in the reference list for you guys to check out if you want to learn more. Okay, so let's talk about statistics of individuals struggling with infertility and infant loss and how this impacts mental health.
Yeah, so the statistics for first we'll talk about loss and then I'll share that
Okay.
infertility ones. But the loss statistics I think are really surprising to a lot of people. But for miscarriages, the statistics are 1 in 4 pregnancies end in a miscarriage. So
Mm,
not 1 in 4 people, but 1 in 4 pregnancies, which I think is a big difference.
mhm,
So it's something that is so common but not talked about a lot. And I think we've gotten better at talking about it the last 5 or 10 years or so, but it's something that can feel so lonely and isolating. And I think that that isolating piece is a big thing that contributes to the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. If you feel alone, you feel like you can't share it with people, you feel like no one understands what you're going through, that can be really difficult.
mhm.
And then on top of miscarriages, if we look at stillbirths, the statistics for that are 1 in 175 births
Okay.
end in a stillbirth,
Okay.
which is pretty like hard statistic
Yeah.
to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So, what would you say? Are these women, are they seeking therapy?
Yeah. Yeah. I work with women who have experienced miscarriages pretty much all the time. I
Mm,
have a few women on my caseload who are navigating that. And then I've also worked with women who have experienced stillbirths. And I think that one is a lot harder for people to seek help at times. And they might be coming to you years later
yeah.
to work through that because it's such a traumatic thing to have to go
Yeah.
through.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I think something that's important to know about these statistics are that you are most likely going to, and if you work with women and birthing people in this population at all, you're going to encounter people who have navigated this,
Mhm.
whether or not perinatal mental health is your specialization. And so
Okay.
you're going to encounter people who have experienced loss. And I think one of the biggest things that we can that can help us show up well for people in this space is not to make assumptions about how the loss has impacted them or not to make assumptions about like the correct ways to grieve or heal or navigate it, but just to hold space
Mhm. Mhm.
and
For
be
sure.
present and give them space to tell their story and to talk about what has happened because so often these are not things that are acceptable things to talk about with a friend at a
Mhm.
coffee shop or at the dinner table with family.
Sure.
These are things that people often carry all by themselves. And even within relationships, I work with clients often who they have gone through this and their partner has gone through this, but perhaps they're grieving in very different ways. And so it can feel really lonely, even if you've gone through it with another person. And so just creating space for them to feel connected and held and supported. And then one thing that I often talk about with clients who have experienced loss, I might share ways that other people have navigated it. And so I've had clients who have gotten tattoos that they have used to kind of like memorialize the child that they lost. Sometimes people will hold funerals and do things like that. Sometimes people will have a yearly time where they check in and they acknowledge what happened and they reconnect. And so, whatever feels appropriate, that's okay. And then I also share that there are people who don't do anything at all, and that's also fine.
Sure.
It's whatever feels helpful for that person is okay. And so, just helping them connect with what they feel like they might need and then giving them permission to do it.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. What would be some ways that you work with clients like this? Is there a certain type of treatment or therapy that you prefer when when somebody walks in your door? How do what's your theory of choice, I guess, or model when it comes to helping these women?
Yeah, so the model that I love is acceptance and commitment therapy. I think that it is so helpful for this population specifically because it's really keyed in on what's important to you, how do you want to show up in the world. Like there's so much space for different values, different beliefs, different ideas of how they want to be as a parent,
Mm,
which I know can be a hard space sometimes for people like of feeling judged or feeling like they didn't do something correctly. So from the get-go, we're focused on what is it that's important to you.
mm,
And then also really working on concrete, actionable things we can do in the moment that can help. One thing that's a little bit different from acceptance and commitment therapy than like more cognitive approaches, like cognitive behavioral therapy, is we're not going to spend time talking about why this thought doesn't make logical sense or doing those kind of things. Because what I've found in working with women in this period is a lot of times people know that the thought might not make logical sense.
mm,
Like it's also really, really common to have intrusive thoughts during the perinatal period. I think the statistic on that is like about 80% of new parents have some kind of intrusive thoughts, even if they're not meeting diagnostic criteria for anxiety or OCD. And so we know that these thoughts aren't often logical, but what can we do in the moment to help us not get so wrapped up in that thought? So how can we create some space, create some distance, and then refocus on what's important and what actions we want to take to move forward in that area? So that's one reason why I love acceptance and commitment therapy for this population,
mm,
just because we can be really like action focused,
mm.
which can feel really helpful when you're in a state where you're feeling really overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And we just need to get some things going so that you feel more grounded. And that's the other piece is like working on mindfulness and being grounded and being in the present moment too.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Are there any contraindications for this type of therapy with a client?
Acceptance and commitment therapy?
Hmm.
No, not that I'm aware of. It's
Okay.
actually been studied in lots of different areas. So it's helpful with many different diagnoses. I would say the one thing that I might take a different approach with or might take a more integrative approach are like PTSD and OCD.
Hmm.
Those can be really helpful. Like OCD, exposure and response prevention is like the gold standard for OCD. So that is always a helpful thing to have training in if you do a lot of work with this population or with with clients who are experiencing OCD. And then for PTSD, I've used cognitive processing therapy a lot in the past, but over the last year, I was trained in brain spotting, which is kind of like EMDR, but a little bit different. And I found that to be really, really helpful.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach it or different modalities that you can pull in, I guess, depending on your training and what your comfort level is. And that's really cool. I love that you're pulling from all these different models to to help your clients?
With infertility, the statistics are that 1 in 5 women struggle with infertility. So infertility is defined as like struggling to get pregnant after trying for 1 year and shows up in a different way than loss. So there is that isolation piece, feeling like it's only happening to you. But then with infertility, there's often this big financial piece. If a client decides to go through with testing and go through with IVF or IUI, that's very expensive and it's not often covered by insurance. And so then there's this financial stress that's also showing up that can create anxiety and pressure in a different way because it's like I'm paying for this thing that I really want, that I really hope happens. But if it doesn't work, I still have to pay for it when it's over. And
Right.
so there can be a lot of stress with that too.
Are you tired of sitting in front of a computer to watch hours and hours and hours of recorded trainings so you can get your continuing education requirements fulfilled? Look, I was, and I decided to do something about it. I have created convenient on the go learning that's completely audio based. I call them pod courses. Well, what's a pod course? Think of it as a hybrid between a captivating podcast and a self study course tailored for you, my perpetually busy counselor friend. In my pod courses, you can explore subjects like addiction issues, ethics and values in counseling, holistic approaches, and much more, all while you're on the move. Whether you're commuting, jogging, relaxing at home, whatever, pod courses blend your favorite podcasts with enriching self study courses, perfect for those always on the go. How it works. So tune in anywhere, anytime. Enjoy the pod courses on any device wherever podcasts are available. Quiz yourself, solidify your understanding with a brief quiz after each pod course. Then, last but not least, certify your smarts. Achieve a score of at least 80% to receive a certificate of completion. If you're curious to learn more about my pod course offerings, head to the link lisamustard.com/pod courses or just click the link in the show notes. Pod courses are brought to you with pride by Mustard Consulting LLC, your trusted NBCC ASAP provider. Oh yeah, no, I can imagine, it's like one stress on top of another stress and the worry and the anxiety and it just probably builds and builds for a lot of people. Yeah. Okay. That's tough.
Yeah. And I think too, like whenever people are navigating infertility and if they do go forward with fertility treatments, it's like you're learning a whole different language. You're walking into this world with all of these tests and all of these hormones and all of these procedures and all of these things that no one is talking about around you. And so you're walking through all of this essentially alone. Like there are other people doing it, but if you don't have anybody else in your life, it can feel really lonely and isolating. And it can also feel hard to go to therapy and try to explain this to someone if they don't have any sort of background or knowledge. A training that I always recommend for therapists who want to just get like an understanding of the language and the process of someone navigating fertility treatments. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine, they have an introductory training for therapists, and I think it's like $30, $40. It's not very expensive at
Mhm.
all, and it can be a great training to take if you're wanting to start to, like, gain knowledge in this area and be more aware of the process and the terms and all of those things so that you can be a space where clients don't have to just, like, explain everything from jump to you.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, we'll put that link in the show notes as well. I'm sure that's a super helpful training for therapists to for that sounds like something I would definitely be interested in learning more about just from where I am and the work I do. It does come up. Like it is something that is and it's one of those things like people when they refer, a client, it's like they don't know how to they like kind of whisper it. It's one of those things where it's like a whispered type of referral. I don't know what that's about, but I guess that's just, society and culture. And are we afraid to talk about it or to ask about it, or we don't want to embarrass people? I don't know. There is something there, though, maybe a stigma.
Yeah, I think there's a
Mhm.
huge stigma around grief, loss, and
Mhm.
infertility.
Yeah.
Like, people don't know how to talk about it. People don't know how to help. People don't wanna make it worse. by saying the wrong thing or asking the wrong questions. And I think by trying not to make it worse, by staying silent, we're actually making it so much harder
Yeah.
for people. Yeah, like it's never a wrong thing to be open and be supportive, even if you might say the wrong thing.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. That's helpful. Do you have any, can you recall any anecdotes from your clients where maybe they shared that, what was helpful when somebody was
Mhm.
talking to them or what wasn't helpful?
Yeah, I think the biggest things that are helpful are just being there, being present, saying like, I'm here. Do you want to go do something? Can I come over and hang out? Can I bring over some coffee? Just like being there and also being open of like, hey, do you want to talk more about do something else that's just distracting and to have fun? But like putting that option on the table for them to be able to talk and share is super helpful. The biggest thing that I have heard that is not helpful is when people try to say that they understand when they haven't been through a very similar thing. So I have heard some things that I wonder, like, how did people say that? But I understand. I lost my dog last year. Things like that are like, oh, we don't wanna be saying those kind of things to people because that can be really, like, invalidating of their experience. And so I think just trying to be there, be present, be supportive, but not having to understand to be able to be helpful.
Okay. Sure. Sure. Okay. That's really helpful. Okay. So let's talk about the knowing the difference between the baby blues and perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. That would be helpful for me to know. Like what's the difference? Where do you draw the line? How do you know you've shifted?
Yeah, so it's actually very specific. So with baby blues, if it's lasting much longer than that 2-week mark, it's not baby blues, it's something else. And I think where this has really gotten lost is that for a long time, and even still now, like medical providers don't always have this knowledge, OBs and doctors that you're going to see. And I've had clients who are struggling like 3 months, 4 months, and they're having a lot of anxiety. They're having a lot of intrusive thoughts. And their provider says, oh, it's just baby blues. This is normal. Like you'll get over it. And if it's lasting more than I'd give it like 3 weeks, but 2 or 3 weeks postpartum, then it is not baby blues. Baby blues is very common. It's experienced by 80% or more. So it happens to most people. But another key distinction with baby blues is that the symptoms are not so severe that you can't take care of yourself and your baby. So you are still able to feed yourself, get up, take a shower if you need to, take care of your baby. You might be emotional. You might feel like your moods are going up and down and all over the place. You might be having some anxiety and some intrusive thoughts, but it's not if you're experiencing suicidal thoughts or feeling like you're a really terrible parent and you're never going to do it right. Those kind of things are different than what we would see with baby blues. Baby blues is more feeling emotional, feeling overwhelmed. Maybe you're snapping a lot at your partner,
Yeah.
wondering what you're doing, but you're still showing up to do it.
Mhm.
That's more what we see with baby blues. And then with the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, we start to see things that are a bit more severe, that are causing difficulty with the ability to function on a daily basis and the ability to take care of yourself and your
Yeah.
child.
Yeah. That's what I thought. It's usually that fine line of is it getting in the way of daily functioning? At
Yeah.
what point? Because I do remember thinking, is this baby blues or is this something else?
Ah,
Yeah. I mean it and it I just felt so out of sorts and so wonky and so I mean, I just remember thinking it's because I'm not sleeping. It's because I'm not getting quality sleep at all. This
yeah.
has been exacerbated by not getting sleep. Are there other things aside from not sleeping that would exacerbate symptoms?
If a client has like a hormonal disorder, something that they've had before, so like PCOS, those kind of things, you might notice more symptoms too. And another big thing that I always ask clients if they've had checked recently is their thyroid. So our thyroid function can shift a lot during pregnancy and postpartum. And so if it's coming out of nowhere and you've never felt like this before and it's 6 months later, like let's make sure that you've had your thyroid checked and your vitamin D levels. Like let's go get a physical with your doctor and make sure that everything's functioning as it should, because that can shift so much during pregnancy with those changes on our body.
Yeah. And then what is recommended right now in terms of medication? Will doctors and I guess I'm asking when it comes, if you know the answer to this, when it comes to breastfeeding and producing milk, I mean, do medications get in the way of that, or what do they say about that?
Yeah, so there are actually, and first off, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I
Sure.
can't
Sure.
provide
Yeah.
medication.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think is not always known is that there are so many medications that are helpful to take and that you're allowed to take during pregnancy and postpartum
Mm.
that don't get in the way of breastfeeding. They're not harmful to your baby. Many of the like regular SSRIs that are prescribed to take those during pregnancy and postpartum. And it's fine.
Okay. That's good to know. Yeah. Okay.
So going back and just like thinking about the different diagnoses that could be present and what that might look like, I think one that has been showing up a lot in my practice and that I learned later on that I was actually experiencing myself is OCD, which I think is something that I don't know, like as a therapist, like going through community mental health, like going through school, like we talk about OCD, but it wasn't something that I like saw in practice a lot. So it's been really cool to learn more about and see more that OCD and anxiety can show up a little bit differently. Like there's a little bit of nuance there to think about. And so with OCD, people typically have an intrusive thought or something that's coming in, right? And then a compulsion or something that they have to do to help lower that anxiety that was caused by that thought. And then it becomes this cycle of like, I have this thought, or sometimes it's not a thought, sometimes it's like a picture or something like an image of something. But there's this thing that comes up that makes your anxiety rise. And then there's something that you have to do to make the anxiety go down. And then it just becomes this cycle that keeps happening. And so what I experienced during postpartum was I had a lot of intrusive thoughts and anxiety around breastfeeding and around having enough like milk in the freezer for my child to make sure that he had enough milk the next day. And so how this showed up with OCD was I would have this thought in my brain of, oh no, I don't know if we have enough milk. And then I would go to the freezer and I would count the ounces of milk in the freezer. And then I'd be like, okay, we have enough milk. And then I would close the freezer and then I'd go back to doing whatever I was doing. And then 20, 30 minutes later, this thought would come in. Oh no, we don't have enough milk. And I could be counting the milk in the freezer 4, 5, 6 times a night. And the amount was not changing, right? Like this was like after I had gone back to work. And so the time in the night was just a few hours. Like I wasn't pumping a lot of milk and like putting it in the freezer in that period. And logically, I knew that the amount of milk had not changed,
Right.
but it felt like I needed to go and count it so that everything would be okay again.
Mhm.
And I've seen this show up for clients in so many different ways of these thoughts of, like, I have a client who I've worked with for quite a while, and she started to have OCD symptoms that we started to explore more together. And one of the big thoughts for her was, oh no, did I leave a pan on the counter that my child is going to knock over and it's going to hit them in the head and then they're going to be unconscious?
Mm.
Um, Mind you, she has a very small child who cannot get out of their room at night, cannot get to the stove. The pans are in the back.
Yeah.
But it got so bad for a period of time that she had to put the pan in the oven and like close the oven door. And then she actually was sleeping out on the couch for a few weeks to be able to watch, to
Right.
make sure that she knew. And so it can show up in these ways that seem to make like no sense.
Right.
And I think that's what can be so hard about OCD is
Yeah.
it often like defies logic.
Mm.
And that can feel, hey, I'm experiencing this or I'm doing these things. I'm like, people don't want to share with you that they're doing these things that they know to keep the anxiety under control.
Mm. Okay. Yeah. It's like you said, you logically know that this is the case and you've you've counted it, you know this the baby can't get out of its room because it's too little, but it is this pervasive thought of this like, well, what if, what if, what if? And then I was just thinking as you were sharing that, like, what's it like for that partner, to be witnessing this and going, hey, logically, this is not possible. And the partner, he's just trying to help, he's just trying to be, supportive, but it's probably really hard for the partner as well.
Yeah, so hard for the partner,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at it from the outside and you don't understand what's happening, it's like, snap out of it.
Yeah.
Like, everything's fine. There's enough milk in there,
Yeah.
right? And then that causes the person who's experiencing it to feel like really invalidated and not supportive. And then it can cause a lot of fights and it can cause a lot of frustration and lead to more isolation and loneliness. I feel like that's why like OCD is such an important thing that we talk about more,
Mm-hmm.
because if we can recognize like, oh, this is OCD, OCD is really treatable,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, we just have to learn, how can we stop this cycle and how can we build up a tolerance of this feeling so that we can experience it and not do the thing that's going to make it go away quickly. And then over time, it starts to get a lot better. These
Mm-hmm.
thoughts start to have a lot less power, and you're able to function in your life the way that you want without having to react every time one of these intrusive thoughts might come up.
Yeah. Yes. I wanted to know, what did you do in therapy that helped you the most with this cycle that you were experiencing?
Yeah, I think for me specifically, I did get connected with a therapist who really helped me identify my own capacity and my own needs and how I needed to make space to take care of myself to lower my own stress levels, which then helped a lot with those symptoms. That's another thing about OCD is the symptoms get a lot worse when you're under a lot of stress. And I was in a really stressful job at the time that was happening. I was not sleeping. We were navigating like taking care of a new baby. We were like the first in our friends to have a baby. So like we were like navigating this like all on our own from the beginning. Help or to let my sister come over and help and like actually get some sleep and feed myself and let myself do things that were not just taking care of the baby and going to work. The symptoms eventually got a lot better for me. I will say though, I don't think that the way that OCD showed up for me was not as severe as I have seen it show up for some clients. Yeah, a workbook that I've been using a lot with clients the last year, it's called the ACT workbook for OCD, and it has been really helpful. So we identify what are the triggers that are happening that are causing this cycle, the compulsion at the other end of it. And then how can we highlight ways in which doing these things are actually taking us farther away from our values and how we want to show up, and what behaviors or things can we do instead
Mm.
that are going to help us show up in the way that we want to show up in the world. So that this workbook has been really helpful for a lot of clients.
What's the name of the workbook again?
It's called the ACT workbook for OCD.
Okay. And is that something that you should work through with a therapist, or can you do it on your own, or?
Yeah, they could definitely go through it on their own if they wanted to. I found it really helpful to go through with clients. We do one chapter a week, or some of the chapters we might split up over 2 weeks.
Mhm.
It's really helpful just to have the homework and the reinforcer of the things that we're talking about in the session too.
Okay. Okay, cool.
I think psychosis is so important to talk about because it is a medical perinatal psychosis. You have to get them to the hospital. They have to go inpatient. I think is really cool to know is that if someone gets to the hospital and they get stabilized, this is something that goes away for people. This is not something that now they have psychosis for the rest of their life. Like typically it's something that is induced by lack of sleep. That's a big one. And so these are just helpful things to think about and to know. I watched a video in one of the trainings I was in, and it showed up in really weird ways for her. Like where she lived, I don't know if you have these where you live. We have these here in Denver in some of the older buildings, but we have old radiators. that turn on and they make a noise and it just sounds different. But she thought that the radiator was talking to her and that she was communicating with that. And her partner found her on the floor in the garage in the middle of the night, sitting and eating chocolate, which was very weird and uncharacteristic.
Mhm.
And just weird, bizarre things.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when we hear psychosis, our mind jumps to really scary things, but you're more likely to see it just show up in really bizarre behaviors
Mhm.
of just very disconnected from
Sure.
what's going on and from who they usually are.
Yeah.
And this is something that I actually haven't seen in my practice, so I don't have firsthand experience with it, but it's always important to be aware of.
Yeah. And of course, all of those, s- documentaries or specials are going to be about, the mom or who had a psychotic break and she ended up, hurting her children or doing something really just horrible. And those, of
Yeah,
course, are the stories that get, sensationalized. But it's good to know that they're pretty rare. If psychosis is going to show up, it's going to be just more erratic or not, maybe not even that's the word, but like just a little bit bizarre behavior, not so much, you know, because you hear those stories and it's
they're
like,
terrible.
yeah,
They
yeah,
are
it's horrible.
unimaginably hard to
Mhm.
think about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but it's talking about this stuff. I think it 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 has you reflect on your own behavior and your own response to things.
yeah,
And I think it's maybe, do we talk about it enough that it's normal to have the baby blues? It's normal to feel like a completely different person after giving birth. So many
yeah.
things are shifting. And even the women who probably pride themselves on, taking good care of themselves and knowing themselves well and getting the sleep, eating nutritiously, getting the exercise, like it can happen to anybody at any time, So
It
I
can.
think, mhm,
And I think a big piece of it that like we haven't talked about that's really important to acknowledge is that like our society is not set up well to support new mothers and young families.
mm,
There isn't a lot of support. The expectation is that you show up back at work pretty quickly doing the same thing that you were doing before, but
mhm,
now you don't have any sleep and you have a lot less support and
yeah,
you have so much more that you have to do.
yeah,
And so, a big thing that I always try to put in perspective for my clients is that you're not failing at this. This is impossible for anyone to navigate,
right,
right?
right,
We've got to get through it because it's here and it's what we're doing. But if you're having a hard time, it's because you're a human, not because you're doing it wrong.
right,
Again,
yeah,
working 40 hours a week, taking care of a small child, trying to take care of your house, trying to make space for your friends and your partner, and taking care of yourself, like that's a lot for anybody to do.
yeah,
And it's okay if it feels hard, and it's okay if you feel like you need some help. It
yeah,
doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong or that something's
right.
wrong with you.
Right. I think that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. We can only do it, our way. And sometimes, I don't know what it was like for you, but I grew up with like go and get a career and learn how to take care of yourself because you never know when you might be on your own or your marriage doesn't work out. You gotta have a career, you gotta have these things. And I had my first child and I was like, I don't want to go back to work. I want to be a mom. I want to be a stay-at-home mom. And I remember feeling I felt really weird about that. I felt guilty on one hand because I had a career and I have a job, as a therapist where I was helping all these people. And I feel like I'm good at it. But then no one told me about, well, you might feel differently once you have that baby. That wasn't really discussed. So I think that this is all just important conversations for us to have as therapy. Maybe we don't have to have them with our client because our client's going to bring to us what they need to talk about. But
Yeah,
it's really important to remember that you just said we're all humans. We all have a different, lens and filter that we see the world through. And we all have different life experiences that, bring us to where we are today. And it's just really important, like you've been saying, hold that space. Just be the therapist to hold that space and let that new mom, share what she with you, what she needs to get from her therapy. I don't know. What do you think about that?
yeah. So Karen Kleiman, who I mentioned earlier, she wrote this book called The Art of Holding in Therapy.
Mhm,
That's all about like showing up and holding space and like being a safe space for women during this period of life.
mhm,
And a big piece of it is like being there, being like, maybe strong is the wrong word, but that's the word that's coming to mind, like a strong, supportive presence of whatever you throw at me, it's gonna be okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, you're not gonna scare me. I'm not gonna think you're the worst person in the world.
Right.
It's gonna be okay. I can take it. Like, I
Yeah.
can hold this for you.
Yeah.
Just how helpful and healing that can be for people.
Yeah.
But I think too, even going back to what you said about like that narrative of like, you have to get a job, you have to take care of yourself, and then having that switch of like wanting to stay at home. Um, I think I sometimes also see the opposite of that, of people who have thought their whole life that they were going to be stay-at-home
Yeah.
parents. And then they get to that point and they're like, oh, I actually kind of hate this.
Yeah.
I miss working. What is actually the right thing for you and for your kids and for your family?
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I love that you said that because the opposite can be quite true. And for me, I go back and forth day to day. I want to be more involved or I want to have more clients or it's no, I want to just give it all up and be home for my kids. And I have found that for me, it comes in seasons. And I think as your kids, when they were babies and toddlers, that was really hard for me. That was the hardest part for me. Now that they're, middle school and teens, like I like being around them more. Of course, as I was sharing with you prior to recording, today has been a day, the past couple of days, but it's hard, I think, and I'm just speaking from, the work that we do. It's like when we are the therapists and we hold space for other people, sometimes it's like, and you have a family, you're going through stuff and you just don't want to deal with, you just want to be there for your kid. And so you have to watch your bandwidth and you have to, make sure that you can handle the energy requirement, I guess. But I think that just comes with like time and experience and knowing that this too shall pass because it doesn't last forever. The emotion, the experience, what we're going through, it just doesn't last forever and we will get through it. And of course, if you need that help along the way, a therapist and therapy is what I always say is I highly recommend it. In fact, I was just thinking that I'm trying to remember the times I went to therapy in my life were in my my mid 20s. And then I did that work. And then I went back after having my first child because I knew I had changed and I was trying to figure out like this role as mom, like who am I as a mom and what am I
Ah,
doing? And I just really remember needing therapy at that point in time in my life. And I didn't need it for very long. It was just a couple months, but I remember it being so helpful and so validating. The woman I was seeing, she totally got me. And so I think the work that you're doing is incredible. I love the niche that you're helping. So if people want to, learn more or follow up with you, is that something that you do? You work with other therapists?
yeah, I do some trainings. The training is supporting neurodiverse clients in the perinatal period. So those are both available just on my website. They're there. And then I'll also do consultation, mentorship to other therapists who want to work in this role too.
Okay, awesome. Well, I will put all of that in the show notes so you guys can connect with Kylee if you want to work with her one-on-one or check out her other trainings. I briefly looked at them and they look incredible. They're over on your website and they're virtual trainings, right? So they're webinars or videos, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and put all the links to the references that you mentioned in this episode. I will link to your website so people can learn more about you. They can check out your other offerings. If people want to
Okay.
work with you, then they can reach out to you. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's just been absolutely amazing to learn from you today, and I really appreciate you coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Please note that the therapy show with Lisa Mustard is for informational and entertainment purposes only and not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice. Always consult with your therapist, doctor, or physician before implementing any suggestions from the show. The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard is edited and engineered by Chelsea Weaver. If you're looking to start a podcast or ready to take the editing off of your plate, be sure to visit chelseaweaverpodcasting.com. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine. Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover all the pod courses and other continuing education offerings. And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.